start recording. Hello there, welcome. I'm looking forward to this evening very much. I'm Teresa Kavanagh, City Councillor for Bay Ward and Council Liaison on Women and Gender Equity. And it's my pleasure to host this event because it's just so wonderful to just talk to each other and find out about how we deal with the issues are out there. And this year's theme for International Women's Day is Break the Bias. So I'm sure that we all have our own stories, and we're certainly going to hear from our panelists who are excellent. And I also would like to start by giving an Indigenous land acknowledgement. I wish to acknowledge that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishabeg Nation. I would like to honor the land and the peoples of the Algonquin Anishabeg Nation, whose ancestors have lived on this territory for a millennia, and whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Thank you. Now, my next honor is to introduce our MC for this evening. I am just thrilled that Suzanne Obiorah had agreed to be our MC tonight. She is our City of Ottawa Director, and I always have to look at the title, I'm sorry, it's so long. Gender, Race Equity, Inclusion, Indigenous Relations, and Social Development. How's that for a title? And she does it all. We're very proud of her, and she's been working very hard since she came in with us, and it's been a pleasure to work with her and her team. She has many wonderful members of her team. Oh, and I'm just going to check to see who else is here. Hold on. I know we had a number of councillors that said they were going to come, so I'm just checking to see who made it. Oh, I don't see any names yet, but if they pop in, Connie or someone on my staff, my wonderful staff, Connie and Georgie are here, so I'm sure that they'll let me know. So we'll acknowledge them. Okay, I'll hand it over to you, Suzanne, and thanks again.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to be here with all of you this evening. So good evening, bonsoir à tous et à toutes. As Councillor Kavanagh said, my name is Suzanne Obiorah, and I feel so honored to enjoy a discussion with such phenomenal women this evening. And welcome to all of you who have joined us this evening. So International Women's Day is an awareness day, and it's also a time for celebration. It's an awareness and acknowledgement that greater gender equality is good for our society socially, economically, politically. And while we are making some progress in certain areas across the globe, indeed there is more work to do. And so today, as we celebrate International Women's Day, our theme of Break the Bias, we take some time to consider where biases surface in our workplace, how they impact our well-being, our mental health, how this may impact representation of women in all sectors at all levels in the workplace, and how this influences experiences of women and gender diverse persons where we work, live, gather, socialize, and interact. And it's an important conversation for us to have. We've seen through various pieces of research that gender bias is still prevalent, even in gender balanced or female dominated businesses and industries. And so where it may be more predominant in industries like science, technology, math, or law enforcement, where historically we've seen this to be occupied primarily by males, we're also noticing that in women-dominated industries, we can still experience a multitude of biases. So tonight, what we want to do is enjoy a comfortable and relaxed conversation about an empowering topic that impacts us all. So imagine us together in our living rooms, by the fire or dining room table, hearing, learning, and sharing our stories as we strive for gender equality and learn more about gender biases. We started this session, as you note, it is being recorded and will be shared, I believe, on the councillor's social media handles or website. But we do hope that you will feel inspired, you'll feel emboldened, encouraged as you hear our panelists discuss their journeys, their passions, and how they are breaking gender biases. So joining us this evening, we have grandmother Barbara Dumont-Hill, a very proud Anishabeg woman who carries great hope for the next generations. We have Fae Johnstone, Executive Director for Wisdom2Action. Salwen Kayembe, a university student who is courageously implementing changes at the City of Ottawa, working alongside her with Councillor Kavanagh in her office. And we have Simone Godbout, CEO and co-founder of Marlow. So each of our panelists will take about 5 minutes to share their story. And once all of our panelists have spoken, we then invite you to ask us questions through the chat box. And so you may pose your questions through the chat, share your reflections, and if you so choose, even share a little bit about your personal journey. Throughout the session, we do ask that you continue to keep yourselves on mute, to keep the audio off so that it minimizes any potential distractions. And without further ado, why don't we start with hearing from grandmother Barbara Dumont-Hill. And once again, we want to create an atmosphere of being in the room together and hope you enjoy the conversation. Grandmother Barbara, can I pass it over to you? Oh, I think your audio's off there. We just have you.
Oops, sorry. Miigwech, merci. Thank you, Suzanne. You know, I always speak from my heart. It's very important. And but because I had 5 minutes, you know, because I could talk 20 minutes about this, I could talk for 2 days about it. So I tried to make myself notes so that I would stick to a timeline. But I wanted to say racism, bias, prejudice started for me long before I was born, starting with lies of those who came to this land, not to share it, but to take it. I don't know what the life was like for my great-great-grandparents, but I would imagine that it was devastating. I know for my father, as a boy, he lived on the land with loving parents, siblings, entrenched in culture, tradition, and language. And then to be forced into Catholicism, disconnection and of land and language. And it created a sadness inside of him in his eyes that I always saw and came to recognize in myself as I moved on through life. My mother was taken to a TB sanatorium when I was born. The federally appointed Indian agent then came to our home and told my father that myself and my 17-month-old brother would be adopted out, and that the other 8 kids would have to go to residential school in Kenora. Our reserve is just 120 kilometers from here. So to move to Kenora would have been a terrible hardship for my parents to ever see us again. With help from an American, my father left his parents, family, friends to protect us from those discriminating laws. Growing up, the only people of color in a town of white Canadians, I felt my first stings of racism, fear, shame, sadness that have always lived inside of me that you might not see, but it's always there. A lie I am often faced with, other than being a dirty savage who is scalping settlers, that we get everything for free. After a rough life in this town, I finished high school and came to the city and got a job. After dating a string of toads, I always say, I met a handsome prince, and we started our life together. My life had taught me that things were different for white people in this country and than for people like me, and marriage certainly confirmed that. March 22nd, 1976, I lost my status. I was no longer an Indian because I had married my husband, who was non-Indigenous. Apparently, I was taking a step up in the world. However, I was still treated as that Indian. Everywhere I went, I was still just that Indian woman, Indian girl, not mattering to many people. There have been very few days in my life where I have not been treated as less than, be it with government officials, police, educators, old Canadians, new Canadians. I get the barbs and reminders that I am a burden on this country. People who look like me carry a burden of also always trying to educate about who we are not and who we are, and not the lies that you have learned about. Today, I have a granddaughter, my beautiful Lily, who's going to be 3 years old come May. My mission is that she will have a better experience in her life journey, to not have her heart hurt by the ignorance of others. My hope is that finally there will be equality for Indigenous people, that we will be treated with respect, that they will see the strength, courage, resilience of our ancestors and not be weighed down of the history of the colonizing nation, that there will no longer be hundreds of missing and murdered women, Indigenous women each year. To know that we belong to this land like our ancestors since time immemorial, and that we were the ones who welcomed, fed, healed the first visitors to this land. We should be very proud of who we are. I challenge everybody listening today to open your mind and your hearts to learn the truth about who you are and what part your ancestors may have played in this history, making us less than on our own lands. And this is not blame, this is knowledge. And we can only grow if we know. So thank you to each one of you who is here tonight listening. Chimikwech.
Thank you, Grandmother Barbara, for your honesty, speaking from the heart and sharing your truth. It is our sacred duty to honor this land, this earth that we live on, and show our gratitude and respect and love. We stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples and we need to recognize the inescapable sacrifices that led to our presence here today. And we understand that through the process of listening and learning and hearing the truth. So we're so grateful for hearing your story, Grandmother Barbara. I'm going to call on Faye Johnstone to share her story.
Thank you, Suzanne. And it's hard to follow Grandmother Barbara, so thank you for opening us in such a good way and for sharing your own story. I can imagine it's not an easy story to share, so I want to give space and honor what you did choose to share in this space, so thank you, Miigwech. My name is Fae Johnstone. I use she and they pronouns. I am a 26-year-old trans woman, a feminist organizer, a writer, and I am the co-owner of what I like to describe a small but mighty social enterprise called Wisdom2Action. And we are a national organization with roots in Mi'kma'ki, or in Nova Scotia in Halifax. And we work on a range of issues, often 2SLGBTQ inclusion, feminist and gender-based violence issues, and mental health. I come into this work as someone who's been living in Ottawa for 13 years, but also as a military brat. So I grew up in smaller communities in Ottawa, and I like to say that nobody ever expected me to turn out the way that I did, and that I've been surprising my parents ever since. I love this city, and I love the community and the connections that I have made in this city. When I think about my own journey, I think, like many of ours, I think of it as a complicated one, and one that I am always bad at putting into a concise, linear narrative, but I'm going to try my best. So I grew up as a shy kid. I was born in New Brunswick, and I remember my early years very much as me trying to figure out why there was something weird in my own self. There was this idea that I felt different from those around me, as many of us do. And I was the shy, quiet kid, which also astounds people who know me today, because I will never shut up. I was the shy, quiet kid who knew there was something different about me, who knew that I was hiding some aspect of myself, but I didn't have the words or the language to describe those things. I didn't know that gay people existed. I didn't know you could be a woman if you just were a woman. And I didn't know that trans folks were in this world. I don't think I actually cognitively processed the existence of trans people till I was like 18 or 19. And that's really awkward, because I like met a couple of trans people at that point, and there was just this whole like cognitive dissonance where I was like, who, what, that's a possibility. But growing up, I only came out as trans about 6 years ago. And so going back to myself as that small, quiet kid, I came out as gay at 16, as a gay boy at that point, and my world started to change. I started to find more confidence, find more willingness to speak out and speak to my truths. But I also immediately encountered stigma and negativity, even in my high school, way back when. I was finding myself being more confident, but it still didn't quite fit. Something still wasn't right. I knew that I was something else, and it was only when I was 20 that I found the words to describe that. And it's at that point that I came out as a trans woman, and my world changed more substantively than I could ever imagine. In a day, my ability to be in public space was jeopardized. In a day, I was no longer safe on the streets of our city. In a moment, I went from experiencing quite a lot of privilege in this world, as I still do, to being worried about my safety when I went to the convenience store, to being worried about my safety when I hopped on the bus, when I walked on my way to work. And that, more than anything else, has been a defining experience of the past 6 years to me. A world where I am well aware that I am not as safe as many others in my world. A world where I have to wrangle with the ongoing stress of always having to be worried. And I think that's something many of us can speak to. I think this city, these streets are not safe for many of us, particularly those who are impacted by multiple forms of violence. And so I now live in a world where even today, 6 years later, I have to think about where I'm going to go and how I'm going to get there every time. I have to think about who is near me, who is driving by me. I don't live in Centertown right now, and so I missed the nightmare of the convoy experience. But even then, in my own community, I was more on edge, because you know when there are more white supremacists, more fascists, more people with, opinions that aren't particularly pleasant, you can feel the increased stress and insecurity as the city itself feels like it's becoming less safe. And that feels irrational at the moment. And I think part of it is, I don't think it's a rational response to feel like we're under attack when I'm like in Vanier, in my house, and there's no one coming for me. But at the same time, I think it's a reasonable response, because I think many of us, again, already felt unsafe. And when you're already unsafe, and then there's another layer added onto it, your world gets that much scarier. In terms of my journey, how I've come to be who I am today, I found myself in my early years always being pushed into this mold, this idea of what makes the right kind of woman. That woman is small, she's not 5'11", She is petite. She doesn't have shoulders like I do. And she probably doesn't have like the Adam's apple I still got going on here. And I felt like a lot of my early years was trying not to let other folks define me. And it is only in the recent years where I've realized that as a young trans girl, I don't have to change myself for others, that it is actually the onus is on others to change their assumptions about me. I also realized that rage is a motivator like nobody can ever imagine. And I like to say that anger and righteous rage are the fuel to every aspect of my work. Because again, in this world where our safety is denied, even as we are told this city is safe, there's got to be an outlet for that anger. There's got to be somewhere to channel it, or we are going to implode. And so I think my biggest message to anyone and everyone is don't hide your anger and channel it in the right kinds of ways. Let yourself be angry, but don't just be angry in your home. Don't just be angry on Twitter. Be angry in your community. Be angry with your peers. And don't let yourself be small for anybody else. As I have come into my identity, I have found that if you are authentic in your own being, you will find other authentic people around you. I have found myself surrounded by a community of women who are cis and trans, who have mentored and supported me like I never would have imagined possible. And I am so thankful for the other women in my life who have made me into the woman that I am today. Women who refused to bow down to violence, refused to do what the patriarchy wanted them to do. But at the same time, the women that surround me are also in crisis. They are trans women themselves. They're Black, Indigenous, and racialized women who are also still unsafe in this city. And so I think I always come back to this idea that our city actually could be safe. Our city could be safer. I don't think it's easy to get there, but I hope more than anything that we are starting to consider other alternatives or other options to safety. I think that many of us have never felt like there was anywhere we could go when we were harassed in public space, that we didn't have options to bring those concerns forward. And I hope we all have the courage now to work in a different way, to explore and consider other options. When I think about how I break the bias in this world, I think I do so by simply being myself, by being a deep-voiced, broad-shouldered trans girl, by bringing myself and other people into spaces that we haven't been invited to before. In my work, I do a lot of advocacy. I have the pleasure of working with ministers. I have the pleasure of engaging with MPPs, and I'm still a rarity in those spaces. I don't see other trans girls in those conversations, and so my commitment is to bring them with me. That being said, the message I want to end on is for us all to recognize that we play a dual role. I am a trans girl. I have my own history of mental health and all kinds of complicated things, but I'm also a white lady from a middle-class family whose parents are military. And so I have a degree of privilege that gives me safety in public that is denied to my Black and Indigenous trans sisters, to Black and Indigenous and racialized folks writ large. And I think many of us have an easier time thinking about our oppression than we do about our privilege. Each and every one of us is able to enact structural and interpersonal violence on others. Each and every one of us is able to harm other women. Women are not a homogenous group that is pure and perfect. Women are complicated folks. We got a lot of stuff going on. Not as much as men, but like a lot of stuff nonetheless. And I think we need to wrangle with the fact that we're not always innocent and that sometimes we are the folks causing harm. And that wrangling with that is a way to better understand ourselves, the ways in which systems have shaped us, and most importantly, to better support those who are still left out of these conversations. With that, thank you so much for having me. I am so happy to be here.
Thank you, Faye, for unapologetically being who you are, for celebrating authenticity with such courage, for sharing with us your stories around the transition. And in that transition, it took a lot of courage, but those experiences around safety, really deep lessons. Feeling safe and being safe are not synonymous, but that is the goal. And so we're grateful to hear your story and feel that enthusiasm through the screen. Thank you, Faye. I'm going to now invite Salwen to share her story.
Hi, thank you, Suzanne. And hello to everyone. Can everyone hear me? Great, sounds good. I want to start off by saying an enormous thank you for being chosen to speak today. It's a great honor to speak at such a wonderful event surrounded by incredible women who have left an indelible mark with their projects and initiatives. I have to be honest, I was a little intimidating knowing that I would have to speak alongside a director, an Indigenous leader, an educational entrepreneur, a community activist, and well-established career women. But if anything, I'm more inspired. Hearing these stories ultimately reinforces the notion to always be and do better in all aspects of my life. Growing up, I remember my mother always lecturing me to do my best, strive for more, and keep my head held up high, regardless of any challenges I might face for being both African and a woman. After my father passed away in 2014, I watched my mom become an absolute superhero. Between 4 kids, a full-time job, providing shelter, food, and clothes for all of us, to this day, I can't comprehend how she was able to do it all. And from all my years of watching her, I knew I had to go above and beyond to make her proud, make myself proud, and make all the other little Black girls that have been encouraged to stay small. I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me occupying high positions in movies, in TV shows, and even in my day-to-day life. It isn't discussed enough, but it certainly affects one's ability to aim high and have that confidence and high self-esteem. I would love to see more women that look like me at City Hall, like Suzanne, in the government, in hospitals, and in higher positions such as CEOs, VPs, and chiefs. For many years, dating back to the colonization era, we have faced much challenges, much hardships, and much discrimination. But look at us today. We are still here and are continuously proving people wrong. As the incredible Maya Angelou has said, still we rise, and we will continue to proudly do so. Seeing women here today and all around the world breaking biases and eliminating barriers is a movement I hope never ends. We deserve to have our voices heard. We deserve a seat at the table, and we deserve recognition for the adversities we have gone through to be where we are standing and sitting today. I am extremely grateful to be working here at City Hall with Councillor Teresa Kavanagh and the rest of the Bayward team, Marlene Legault, Connie Del Falco, Sue Garvey, and Georgie Gosham-Hamer. This opportunity to work with you all will really open up many, many opportunities for me. I mean, when people even ask me, hey, Salwen, where do you work? I have the biggest smile on my face and an air of arrogance when I tell them, oh, I actually work at City Hall. It's a great ego boost, I have to be honest, but it really demonstrates that I can work here and so can you, regardless of the color of your skin, your gender, your sexual orientation, and your immigration status. Going forward, I am keeping my career options completely open. Who knows, maybe I'll decide to run against Teresa Kavanagh at the next election. Or maybe I'll go to law school after getting my communications degree. Perhaps I'll do real estate, become a paralegal, or even start a business. I'm not too sure. However, I do know that I can do anything I put my mind to. I will never limit myself or let anyone place barriers in my way, because I am my mother's daughter and determination runs in our blood. Thank you.
Goosebumps, Salwyn, from that. First and foremost, you deserve to be here among this panel. Absolutely, you deserve to be here. And learning is reciprocal, regardless of age, where you are in your life journey. We have opportunities to learn from everybody who we interact with, and we have great privilege in learning from you. I agree with you that we have to continue to break down those barriers. We cannot move backwards. We continue to rise. Society requires it from us. And I would say, I don't think it's arrogance, but pride when you're sharing amongst your friends where you work. So I'm going to invite Simone now to share her story.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone who shared their stories. I'm so inspired, and Suzanne, same, goosebumps. That was really powerful. I'm Simone, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Marlow. And Marlow started, it was just a conversation amongst friends at the beginning. My co-founder had shared that she felt really uncomfortable inserting traditional tampons, and she was taking a week off of the gym every month. When in the summertime she was trying to lead an active lifestyle, she felt really limited by her other option of pads. And she'd been to the gynecologist to describe this pain and discomfort, and her doctor told her to spit on her tampon to make it easier to insert. And that shock factor blew away our team. We thought, we're sending people to the moon and we're 3D printing things. How is that the best solution out there? And then we spoke to a nonprofit who told us that the second most collected item during their beach cleanups were menstrual products because of all the plastic in the products. And our group of, we are 4 female founders, got so interested in the space. And in the last 2 years, we've been working to build and launch our first product. We raised a pre-seed round of $500,000. We got Health Canada approval. We launched the first lubricated tampon kit to make insertion easier. And the one that gets me most excited is we've built an online community of over 15,000 menstruators to really spark conversation around topics that have been commonly ignored or whispered about. And we learned that so many of us were either on autopilot, we weren't really thinking about what we were putting into our bodies, and we were turning to Google as our best source for information with not such reliable information all the time. And so really our goal is to spark conversation around these topics so that women and people who don't identify as women, but those who menstruate, have a place to go to get their questions answered and to feel like they have a community of, yes, I get that. I felt the same way, or I haven't felt that way, but I've always wondered. So that's what we're working on building. And another shocking statistic that we found from our community is that 98% of people felt that their sex ed hadn't prepared them for real life. And that just seemed like an incredible opportunity to use the community that we've built to really bring credible voices forward so that people can get their questions answered. So beyond the product, we're really just excited to push forward a lot of conversation and education around these topics that have been ignored, and to drive a lot more research in a space that, I mean, I don't know if everybody knows this, but Advil has only ever been tested on males in the research space, because for a variety of reasons, but one being that women were deemed to have too much irregularities and fluctuations for scientific studies. So there's just such an interesting, sad but interesting gap in research as well to fill, that we're really excited to push forward. And it's been an interesting journey, definitely building a business as 4 female founders. And I just want to celebrate also my co-founders, who 2 of them are women of color, and only 2% of venture capital funding goes to women. And that's just averaged out as women in general. And as we know, there's so many different layers to being a woman. And so those stats are shocking, but yeah, I just wanted to celebrate my 2 co-founders as well that couldn't join us, but they make working such a joy. And that's a little bit about my story. I'm happy to answer any questions. And I challenge you to vote with every dollar you spend. It's something that I didn't think about before I was an entrepreneur, but really vote with your dollar to support the businesses you believe in, the organizations you believe in. And I think International Women's Day is a really phenomenal opportunity to sort of reflect on who we want to give our energy to. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Simone, for sharing your story and talking about the importance of bringing dignity to women, about some of the issues that perhaps many of us haven't been comfortable with sharing or asking. And, you know, discussing the issues that impact our lives day to day and our health and well-being can't be something that we struggle with in silence. And beyond the conversation is then doing something about it and creating and innovating products with the experience of the woman in mind. We need more of that to help us with really living our best possible lives. So thank you for your innovation and your leadership with the business that you've started with your co-founders. So we've just had an opportunity to hear from 4 very powerful and inspiring women, offering great perspectives and sharing their experiences and contributing to our community. And now we'll open the floor to all of you to start some conversation. And as I had shared earlier, we invite you to write any questions or reflections in the chat for our panelists.
I think it'd be great just to hear from people too of how you identify with our 4 panelists, or what stuck out to you in terms of something that just, wow, you didn't know or would like to know more about. So this is an opportunity for that as well.
While people are thinking, I just like to say, you know, I listened to these 3 young people, and just how my heart, I always say, you know, that there is hope because of women like this, people who are going to speak out, who are going to do something. You know, Faye, you know, your fears, those are real things, and there's a lot of people who have no idea what it's like to have those fears. So, you know, I'm so grateful you talked about that, and even those truckers. I know for me too, I was worried about the young Indigenous women, because we know truckers are notorious for probably a lot of those murders across the country. And you know how powerful your message is. And Simone too, like, women are sacred, and those were teachings our people had, and how it was important to know those, for women, young girls, young women to be inspired. And I'm so glad you're bringing the negativity out of that this amazing opportunity to create change in those spirits of those young women. So I will certainly be supporting your cause for sure. And I wish you had been around me whenever I was a teenage girl, because what I learned, it was not good. So and again, taught me to kiss those toads. But and Salwen, oh my gosh, it's amazing what a strong mother, an amazing mom can do, and the power to you. And I'm thinking, why run against Teresa? Run against Trudeau. So anyways, that's all I want to say. Hopefully there's some questions now, but thank you for allowing me to be amongst these powerful role models, and I'm so grateful. So Chimigwech.
And I think, Barb, first, thank you, Grandmother Barbara, thank you so much for those beautiful and inspirational words that you speak of the panelists. And I wonder if I can invite the panelists maybe to just respond to some of the lovely accolades that we've just heard from Grandmother Irene. And once the panelists have had a chance to respond, I do see one question from Joan. Did one of the panel, yeah, Faye, go ahead.
I like everyone pausing and like, who's gonna jump in first? Simone, I used to work in a sex shop and as a sex educator, and I've spent a lot of my life like helping older folks deal with the bad sex that they had as children, and like so much love and space for what you're doing. But Grandmother Barbara, just thank you. I think we are all walking in the steps of those who came before. And thank you for creating spaces where I think other generations created spaces where these conversations are possible and have challenged us to do this work better, to celebrate other young women and broaden the conversation. So I just thank you.
And what you left with me was just how vulnerable you were with the story you were telling. I know you said you wrote some notes ahead of time, but it just felt so real, and that's a scary thing to do. It scares me at least. And so the courage that you had to share with such honesty, a story that must not be easy to share. Thank you. It really inspired me.
As I mentioned earlier, I was extremely intimidated speaking here with all of you women who have done such incredible works, but I'm so inspired. I am so incredibly inspired. Faye, Simone, Barbara, thank you. As Faye mentioned, you guys paved the way and I'm following right behind there. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Salwen. I see that we have a hand up, and I don't mind navigating between hands up and monitoring the chat to make things easier. So go ahead, Joan. You look like you've got your hand up there. And just need to turn on your audio.
I wanted to thank all of the panelists. They were really excellent. And I've known Barbara sort of slightly through mutual friends for several years, so I knew some of her story. But it makes me sick to think that people have gone through and every day been treated as if they weren't equals. And it just, it was very enlightening. Also Faye's story. It must be so hard to feel you're not fitting in some way. And I'm really sorry that that's happened to them. That's really all I wanted to say. But again, thank them for taking part.
Thank you, Joan. We do have just a question here. Grandmother Barbara, are you online or social media? There's a member in the audience who's just curious about how they can follow you if you have any social media handles.
Actually, I don't. And you can see that I was supposed to have an International Women's Day screen. I could not even do that. I am very technically challenged, and people ask me that all the time. How can we follow you? And I always say, well, sorry, I'm not on any social media. But I would certainly be willing to share my email, and if anybody ever wants to have a conversation with me, I am definitely open to those type of talks and a meeting somewhere, or even having someone come to my home for tea and maybe some bannock, and just that's my social media. Sorry.
We have a comment here about one of my favorite episodes of Orange is the New Black. It's a Netflix series, is when the trans character needed to educate the other inmates about their own bodies with the diagram. Reminds me about how little we are taught about our bodies. And yeah, there was a little bit of, go ahead there, Faye, were you gonna add something?
Just I think like I love, I think, you know, early feminist movements were really talking about sex and sexuality in a lot more actually than some of our movements are now, which I think is really cool. Like women talking about their body parts, talking about masturbation, talking about pleasure. And to me, you know, feminism is also about rediscovering pleasure. It's also about rediscovering our relationships to our bodies. And I spent 2 years working at Venus Envy Ottawa. So Ottawa's 2S LGBTQ sex shop and bookstore. And the amount of conversations I've had with, you know, women who are later in life who are getting terrible information from their doctors and are coming in with all of these questions. And so I want to invite anybody who has those questions. Venus Envy is a great place to go to get them answered in a supportive, well-lit and not strange environment. But also that, like, I think everyone is always unlearning. I think we're all coming to terms with the evolving relationships that we have with our bodies and should embrace the pain that sometimes comes with that and the pleasures too.
Thanks, Faye. We have another question, shifting gears from sexuality and sex education to policy. But do any of our panelists have any specific suggestions around how governments at any levels, what they should or could be doing around gender, I'm going to say gender equity and or achieving gender equality? The Faye's got universal childcare. Any other reflections around how we want to be increasing awareness to achieve equality amongst women and gender diverse persons? Any comments from our panelists?
Very specific to my space, but because I live and work in it, I know it well. Access to menstrual products is still an issue, and government could be really powerful in solving that. So there's been some pilots now in Ontario schools providing free products, but improving that access to everyone who needs access to products. I mean, the easiest comparison that we can make is to toilet paper. Toilet paper is available in public washrooms to anyone who might need it. And similar to toilet paper, menstrual products are a necessity for those who need it. So access to products is still definitely a priority that we're working on.
And when I think about that comment, I think about why representation is so important around decision-making tables to really help with bringing those diverse perspectives around community needs to the right tables for conversation.
I also wanted to.
Please, Grandmother Barbara.
I was going to add to, we're almost 3 years since the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and the Prime Minister has done nothing to address, to speak on the calls to action from the commissioners. So I think it's time for that to be done, and don't let this be another inquiry that costs a lot of money, that is just placed on a shelf somewhere along with the many others that have gone before, and nothing ever changes. So for this Prime Minister and the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Grandmother Irene. And we all have access to the report, and knowledge is power. And I think it's important for us to be familiar with that inquiry, familiar with the document, and see what we can do throughout our community and through all levels of government. Thank you, Grandmother Barbara.
And quickly to add on, I just want to say, like they mentioned, the universal childcare is so important. Access to free menstrual products, and as well as inviting more women of color. I'm talking Black women, Indigenous women, trans women, any marginalized women inside the government. We need these people to implement the change. And like it has to happen. It's 2022 right now. Why isn't this happening? And I feel like being here and having you incredible women speaking about this just enforces the idea that we need this to happen now. Not just for us, but for our kids, for our cousins, our nieces, our nephews, for all of us. So thank you once again. This is incredible.
And if I can just add my last thoughts on this question, I think I really like money. I think money is not the only solution to a lot of problems, but when I look at women's services across Canada, and I do a bunch of work with YWCA Canada, and our women's movement is chronically underfunded in this country. We're seeing increasing rates of gender-based violence in association with the pandemic. Intimate partner violence is on the rise in this country. Targeting of Muslim women in communities across Canada. anti-Black racism and misogynoir, I think there is a need for a deep and sustained investment in our women's services and in our feminist movements. I would add and the 2S LGBTQ organizations too, who often are working across gender diversity in a big way, but we have sectors that are struggling that provide these essential services should never have to fundraise to deliver the care that they need, but most of them do. And our governments can put the money behind those organizations. We know it's cost effective. We know it's good policy. We have the resources, but we're just not putting them where we need them.
Thank you, Faye. And what we've started to do certainly at the city is pay really close attention to investments in organizations that are led by women, serving women. It's a starting point, but most recently with our community funding framework, we did apply that lens and wanted to prioritize funding to organizations serving women and gender diverse communities. So work to do, but couldn't agree with you more. So as we talk about breaking the bias, I think that there's some opportunities here to even surface some of the biases perhaps that you may have encountered in your day-to-day as you're seeking to advance each and every one of your causes. And I want to just talk a bit about not only the biases that you encounter, but maybe surface some of the biases that aren't as obvious. You know, we talk about intentional biases, but I think a lot of us experience some of these unconscious or unintentional biases in our everyday interactions. And I'll come back to knowledge is power. And so as we help to uncover what some of those unconscious biases may be, I think that's one step towards creating a more inclusive interaction within our society. I wonder if the panelists can just take a little bit of time to share an experience around a bias that they have encountered that perhaps the other person wasn't aware was taking place, and talk a little bit about what that was and how you handled it.
Such a hard question. I'm just like, oh God, I love the question, but I'm gonna need like a minute to think about it.
No problem. Is anybody ready to? Yes, Simone?
Yeah, I can share a story. It's something that I actually wouldn't have noticed on my own, and I came across a study that another entrepreneur had shared with me, and in hindsight, it became really obvious, but I wouldn't have recognized it just on my own. But the study pretty much explains how during the pitching process for raising money in the investor meetings, the Q&A is actually where a lot of the gender bias lands. So after the pitch, investors will go to ask questions, and this PhD study discovered that 2/3 of the question to women identifying founders were often very, let's say, conservative in the sense of how are you going to keep competitors away, or what's stopping someone else from copying this idea? And the questions to the male founders were much more around, why is this going to be the next billion-dollar company? And so as an entrepreneur, you often want to just respond directly to the question that is asked of you. But those questions really, the way the money shook out at the end of that question period was very different depending on what kind of questions were asked. But what's really interesting about this study is that then with this awareness, if entrepreneurs are able to reframe the question in their answer, the amount of funding that went to women founders increased drastically. So I think it's just a really interesting example of something that I wouldn't have noticed at all through my own experience. And it was someone else that shared this story with me. And in hindsight, I was able to recognize it. But I think that must happen much more commonly than we even realize it does. But that hindsight was really interesting to me.
I thought about it. I think the two things that come to mind for me are there's this weird bias that all trans women are also sex workers. And that like pops up in public spaces in like really weird ways, right? So I have had more people like solicit me from vehicles than I ever would have imagined possible. And the thing that I like to share about that bias is one, not all trans women are sex workers, just to make sure we all know that. But B, that there's also nothing wrong with being mistaken for a sex worker. And like, I had my own like initial bias and reaction to that concept where I was like, oh, like this is an association with something bad. And my own process was like, oh, women deserve to work in the kinds of ways that they want to work, and it's not anybody's place to judge them. And then the second one that I always come up against is being defined only by my transness or my trans womanhood. So I spend a lot of time talking about my gender, but I am so bored of it. I only talk about it because we live in a world that isn't nice to women and trans women. But this tendency to define women from marginalized identities only by that experience of marginalization, rather than business owner, writer, loud, angry gal who won't shut up on Twitter. Like, we are so much more than that one story that the world accepts of us.
What you share when you say that is really needing to challenge the stereotypes and challenge the single stories that seem to follow, various communities. And we are so many layers, and we're such complex people, each and every one of us. And you're right that there's some danger in falling into the trap of that single story. And that single story doesn't necessarily need to be a negative thing, but there's more than that particular story. Before Salwen and Grandmother Irene jump in, I just see a question here. I think Caroline wanted to share some reflection. Caroline, are you able to turn on your audio to share your question? Are you there, Caroline? She might just be having a bit of difficulty with the technology. We'll work behind the scenes to see what's going on there. But Grandmother Barbara or Salwen, did you want to share an experience with?
Can you hear me now? Oh, sorry.
No, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. My name is Caroline Chartrand, and I'm from the Red River Métis Nation, member of the Métis Nation. And I'd like to thank you for your acknowledgement, your land acknowledgement, and thank you, Grandmother, for your words and for being here. And I don't know why I'm getting all emotional. But anyway, I'm just wanted to share this. And my question is, if anybody has had this kind of conversation with anybody, or if you would consider opening up this conversation and discussions everywhere and anywhere, including on media. But here's my story. Several decades ago, when I was younger, I was with two of my favorite friends. They were elder women. One of them was Cree Métis and the other one was Mennonite. And I had them over at my dad's place on our traditional land. And we were working in the garden, and I can't remember what I said to them. I might have been offering them lunch, but you know what? I probably said something like, what would you guys like for lunch? Or it's time for lunch now, you guys, or something like that. But they brought it to my attention that I was continuously referring to them as guys, and they said, we're not guys. And these were my elders. And you know, after that, I never even knew that I had been saying this. It didn't occur to me, but I was catching myself using this word guys for women and or mixed groups of people on a really regular basis. And I remember when I was like learning to read, and I was in grade 2 and 3 and 4, and coming across texts all over the place that used the word man or mankind or man-made when referring to human beings, and how left out I felt of the conversation, and knowing darn well that they were not talking about me when they were talking about mankind and how I felt about it all. And that's changed. Our museum here in Manitoba used to be called the Museum of Man and Nature. And now it's called, they're not using that, it's called the Manitoba Museum now. That's changed. But I've noticed, I listen to CBC radio all the time, and they're constantly, people are referring to males and females or all female groups as guys, hosts. And anyway, I sent them lots of emails, and some of them have changed and some of them not, but I keep on asking them to consider just talking about it, like just openly talking about it. And even for people who, like, every once in a blue moon, I still catch myself doing that because it's a bad habit from a long time ago. But as soon as I catch myself, I will say, I'm sorry, apologize, and I'll just bring up the whole conversation and talk about it. So thank you for listening. I won't keep on and on about it, but I just wanted, you know what, maybe I'll send you an email later because I'm not very good at technology, and somewhere I saved these notes. There was a referral because I was looking at this issue online, and I came across this woman who was saying it's especially harmful to Indigenous women. And I wish I could quote it, but I just can't find it in my phone. I know it's in my phone somewhere, but I'll send it to you when I find it. And thank you for listening. And I would really love to hear from anybody who has had a experience talking about this, and if you would all consider bringing up this discussion. And thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing, Carolyn. There's so much power in language, and it's really important for us to learn, you know, on the impacts of the words that we're using as we interact. So thank you very much for sharing. Now, grandmother Barbara and Salwen, we haven't heard yet from you. I wondered if you had any reflections around some of the potential unconscious biases that you may have been exposed to.
Do you want to go ahead, Salwen?
Thank you, Barbara. Talking about the power of language, I remember this one time, I was 15 and had just been invited for my first job interview. It was my first big kid adult job at a call center. I had come, I was speaking with the HR recruiter, and she had given me a script to read. And I read it right after. She looked at me, she said, "Wow, you speak such good English." And you know, at the time, I was 15, I thought it was a compliment. I said, thank you. But honestly, reflecting back on it, I just feel so disgusted. Why would you look at me and assume I can't speak English? And I'm thinking, how many times has this happened? How many times have employers looked at my name, Salwen Kayembe, I'm African and I'm proud, and said, no, we're going to reject her. Or they've seen me, they saw that I was Black and said, she's probably not good for the role. So that's just one experience. It was 5 years ago, but it's still there, it haunts me.
No, you're absolutely correct on that, Salwen. There's a lot of assumptions that get made, particularly in the hiring process, and there's quite a bit of research that looks at male, female candidates and looks at the names that might have a Anglo-Saxon background versus names that might have an African root in it or what have you. And a lot of research has gone into selection and hiring practices and the biases that surface on that. And you know, it is very true in that innocent, oh, you speak so eloquently. And there's an undertone in there. And it's a common experience that Black men and women have endured. And I'll speak, you know, in the research that I've looked at in those studies particularly. And hearing it once or twice is one thing, but a continual experience of that is leading to some assumptions that perhaps why is it a surprise for a Black woman to articulate?
Mhm.
And it is one of the very common microaggressive behaviors that surface in many settings. Thank you for raising that and recognizing it, you know, as early as you've been exposed, as early on as you mentioned.
Mhm. Yeah, Salwen, for sure. I had, you know, I was told one day that I seemed to be a credit to my race. And, you know, so it's something we get a lot of, and same with you, Faye, you know, that they assume that all Indigenous women are sex workers, and I was during the MMIWG, I traveled with the Department of Justice to the hearings across Canada. And in December in Thunder Bay, the last of the hearings, I had a fall. When the paramedics came, they did not want to take me to the hospital. They said they could smell the alcohol from me, and that they could tell but from my eyes that I was a drug user. I haven't had a drink of alcohol in 36 years. So if he could smell the alcohol from my lips, from my mouth, you know, he had a very good sense of smell. But when I was, they did not want to take me to the hospital. They said I was intoxicated, had a fall, and that they did not want to take me. But the lawyers I was traveling with, of course, pushed them to take me. And when I got to the hospital, the first thing the doctor said when he came in is, "We don't give out drugs." And I said, okay. And I told him why I was there. I had this massive bump. I had fallen down a whole flight of stairs, and I was on blood thinners and needed to have this checked out. And we counted 11 times that he said, "You are not getting any drugs. We don't give out drugs here." And assume that I was just there to get drugs from them, that I did not deserve to be treated. And the lawyer who was with me, she said, "You know, it's funny because you should be able to tell that you're not a street person." And this is a lawyer I traveled with for over a year and a half. And I said, even if I was a street person, I deserve to be treated with respect. If I have an injury, no matter if something is wrong, I deserve to be treated like any other person would be treated. Because street people are human beings too. People who are Black are human beings too. People who are trans, people who are different are human beings. That should not be our basis for who gets treated and who does not get treated, and who gets spoken to nicely, and how you are going to be looked at. You know, to double glove, to touch me was another thing they all did when they came into the room. I've been to the hospital many times. I've never had my doctor or nurse, before they give me a needle or to check my heart raters, have never double gloved, but they did at the Thunder Bay Hospital. Again, obviously assuming I was a drug addict, so it's these biases are there, and you know, the privilege of not understanding bias, the privilege of not understanding racism is something you should be very grateful for, but we deserve to not have biases against us just because of the outer appearance of who we are. So that's all I wanted to say about that.
And thank you once again, grandmother, for sharing right from the heart the truths and realities. And there is significant harm that results from these biases, which is why it's so important for us to have this conversation. And we all have them. We're all exposed to, you know, based on how we interact in our life, we make impressions or conclusions, right or wrong. This is how we're socialized as human beings. But where we have opportunity is when we're able to learn about the impacts of the stories that we've been exposed to and the impacts around the decisions or how we understand or interact with each other. That's where the opportunity lies in creating a safer place for all of us. Goodness, I've just lost my place here. Dr. Judith Ainsworth had put in the chat one of my favorite authors, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who did a TED Talk on the danger of a single story. And Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, to me, exemplifies very much why representation matters. She is an author from the village where my parents are from. And if you have an opportunity to read any of her books, you just get lost in the Nigerian culture. And it was a beautiful experience for me. Growing up, I didn't have opportunities to read from authors from where my parents are from. And what I love about her writing is she shares experiences in Nigeria, and then she shares experiences of Nigerians in North America. It speaks to the jokes of some of the foods that we eat, interactions that we have, braiding hair. And this is important. It's important for girls like me or women like me growing up to have an affinity to a story that speaks to similar experiences. But she goes in and do watch the TED Talk. It's posted in the chat, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and she speaks to the danger of the single story and how in society we might be socialized to believe and understand a certain group of people, and how that shapes then what we believe a certain group of people should and should not do in society, or can and cannot do in society, and how sometimes we might get caught up in an argument or discussion, or find some tensions around seeing or interacting with certain communities. And grandmother Barbara spoke to exactly that experience in the healthcare system. So the conversation around the gender biases is so critical, I think, to achieve our journey of equality, and to really understand where some of the roadblocks surface that prevent full participation and inclusion for all of us. Joan, you have your hand up, please, by all means. Oh, your audio's off there, Joan. There you go.
You can hear me now? Okay.
There you go.
This is on a different topic, but still related to women, and especially women in the workforce. And I'm wondering if it's something to do with our education system. Years ago, I worked for a city councillor, and I suppose this is what's bringing it back to me. But when we talked amongst ourselves, the women in the group all felt that we were there to do the best job we could do. And the men, and we thought that the men were there to get ahead. It was a stepping stone to something else. And I'm wondering if as women, I mean, it was basically a helping role. And I'm wondering if there's something in our education system that is encouraging women to take a back seat, whereas men are being encouraged to go ahead. These were all, well, I wasn't that young then, but most of them were pretty young, and the guys were young. And I wondered if anybody else had noticed that too, or if it was just that particular workplace, or if they feel that there's something in themselves. I know I don't really like speaking in public. You know, if I did, maybe I would be doing something else or would have done something else with my life. But I don't know if we're taught different things or given a different attitude about coming forward. Anybody?
Suzanne? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, grandmother.
I was just going to say, first of all, hi, Joan. Nice to see you again. When I think about this, for me, like I think it's obviously, to me, it's a European thing, because with us, the women were at the front, were the leaders. They were the way forward always. And the power of women, the sacredness of women was so important, that we are the water. We are the ones who bring life to the world. And the men were there as the fire, yes, and to support us, not to walk ahead of us, not to be our leaders, but to walk with us and to support us, for the great things that we would bring into the world. And so for me, I feel it's a European concept. Sadly, you know, the things that we lost on this land was those very ways of the power of women. And so I don't know so much. I think for me, it's not just women, because a woman today, a privileged woman today, to me, who is maybe feeling like that or has lived that experience, is still a very different experience than my life experience of being held back or not being being recognized or for who we are, that the men were there to step forward. Women, we were meant to be there, stepping forward, leading the men, I think. So that's just my interpretation of that. But I'm sure these other young women are going to have something really fantastic to say about it. So I'm listening.
So I'll open the floor up to Simone, Faye, or Salwen if you have any further reflections on what Joan's raised.
Just that I think Joan, like, you're definitely correct. I think that we live in a world where we teach women and young women in particular, like, not to ask for raises, not to, you know, fight for their roles. We live in a world where I think a lot of women are not taught that they have the opportunity, that they should step into the opportunity. Somebody in my life recently said, you know, women are the worst negotiators. And I think that's, you know, bullshit. But I think what we do have is a world that teaches women that they couldn't and shouldn't negotiate, that their value is less. And that is definitely like a colonial construct. And I think it is tied into like patriarchy in all kinds of interesting ways. But I do think we don't encourage women. There's a reason that we have to ask women to run for office multiple times before they put their foot in and step into the race, right? It's not because of anything about women, it's about the world around us and the patriarchy.
I was reflecting on just how it was interesting that you were thinking about it in the classroom setting and how early that gets socialized. And at least my own experience in elementary classrooms, is the girls were praised for being well behaved and the boys were uplifted when they were the funny troublemakers, but it was almost celebrated, you know, everyone was laughing along with them in support. So that's just sort of a story that it made me think of. And yeah, it's hard to unlearn those things once you've grown up with them.
Yeah, definitely. And to add on to that, I remember just even being in high school, the teachers would always tell the young girls, you know, be polite, don't be too opinionated. If you want a man to respect you, be kind, just sit down. But then the men, they're saying, take charge, show initiative, be assertive. And it's like, why aren't you showing that to the young women as well? So that's definitely an extra story to add there.
And something that I experienced while I was in business school too was this big shift of women being encouraged to be more like men, to be more assertive. But maybe that's not what our world needs right now. I mean, time and place, of course, but that was definitely a big narrative that I heard while I was at school.
Imagine if we were encouraged to just be who we are. Imagine. We have one last question before we wrap up. Carolyn had brought a question about what is it that we should be raising. We have a provincial election on the horizon. So as we think about that election opportunity, what should we be raising during the provincial election as it relates to gender equality?
I always have thoughts. I would, again, like reemphasizing, we don't have a childcare deal in Ontario. We're the only province without one. If we don't have one by the election, that needs to be an election issue. But the bigger thing is like, let's get it done before there's an election, because no more time, any day is too many days. And then funding for IPV, funding for GBV, funding for menstrual products. I would also really love to actually take another look at sex ed in this country and in this province. Our sex ed, Ford decided to do some weird things to it and then undo it was just weird. And I'm still like, no one really knows why or what happened. But better sex ed will equip the next generation of young girls with the ability to understand their bodies, to communicate about consent, and to recognize that bodies aren't bad things. And I think that is and should be an election issue.
Thank you so much, Faye, for talking about the sex ed. I completely forgot about that. It is so crucial for young women to know about this. They have so many questions about our bodies, but it's such a taboo subject. So definitely that is something that needs to be discussed at a higher level, as well as just including more diversity. Like it really is time. We need it to happen.
And Simone and Grandmother Barbara, any final words?
I totally agree with everything that's been said. And I'd even add that there's so many nuances to sex ed. The way at least I was taught was the boys go in one room and the girls go in another. And that's really binary. And also it's important for boys to learn about what's out there and vice versa. And so tons of nuances to that conversation, and I'm really passionate about it, but just how binary it currently is. And yeah, a lot of work to be done, but Faye, thank you for bringing that up.
And so with that, I do want to thank our panelists for sharing their stories, their perspectives, their ideas, for empowering us during this evening discussion. And Councillor Kavanagh, I'll pass it over to you, but also just a quick thank you and an honor to have been able to join you for this conversation this evening. Councillor Kavanagh.
Oh, thank you very much, Suzanne, and thank you for being our MC this evening. I was just thinking, MC is actually an acronym for Master of Ceremony, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm just as glad we used the acronym. We've never really gotten past a neutral term on that one. But anyway, this was great. The panelists, you were amazing. You were so open, and you gave us a piece of yourself, and that was wonderful. It was, I think we learned a lot emotionally, it was an emotional connection that we made with all of you. I appreciate it. Faye, grandmother, Simone, Salwen, all fabulous contributions. I couldn't be happier. It was very, very, very good. I have something to ask before anyone leaves, before people run away, and people who've got their cameras off. We have a theme this year, and it's called Break the Bias. And there's a symbol for that. And it's this. And I'm going to ask if everyone can do that. And I'm going to ask Georgie if she can take a picture of us doing this. Because I think this is an opportunity to show we're all working together to break the bias. Okay, Georgie, are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm going to take a couple because there's lots of wonderful people. So I'm going to do a couple. So 1, 2, 3, everyone there, and one more. One sec. And another. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Excellent. So we've all made our commitments, and we're going to work hard to do that all year round. It's not just for one day. So I appreciate very, very much everyone coming out. It was a very positive experience, and you made it so with your great questions and comments, and very much appreciated. I just want to say that each of our speakers, we've offered to give a donation to a charity. We can't give honorariums. Apparently that's not part of rules that we have at City Hall, but we're willing to give a donation to the charity of their choice so that we leave something for them to honor them. This has been a wonderful evening. It's been a wonderful International Women's Day. And remember, we don't have to do things like this once a year. We can do it all the time. Just think about where we are, what we've accomplished, and what we have yet to do. And I think we've done a pretty good job on that. Thank you so much. Take care. Have a great evening.